This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I usually rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Sometimes though I like to look at the other end of the spectrum, and that's where I'm going today, with a look at the 10 worst 5-color cards in Magic. A couple weeks ago I looked at the best 5-color cards, so it made sense to do this one too. In that top 10, we saw that cards that are 5 colors tend to be pretty darn powerful, and this makes sense, because getting 1 mana of each color is a relatively big challenge. However, that doesn't mean that all cards with a 5-color identity are good, as we'll certainly see in this video. As usual, to make it on one of my worst lists, a card had to be bad in 99 card, 60 card, and 40 card formats, and it has to have been bad for its entire history. If those things aren't true about a card, it's hard to make a claim that it's one of the worst cards ever printed. Alright, let's dive in with my picks for the 10 worst 5-color cards in Magic. At number 10, I've got Transguild Courier. For 4 generic mana, it's a 3/3 that is all colors. While this card doesn't actually have all 5 mana symbols appear somewhere on the card, it is considered a 5-color card in all zones, and that means you can't play it in any commander deck apart from a 5-color one. So it does have a 5-color identity. Anyway, even with that restriction in place, you're not missing much. A hill giant that only has the upside of being all 5 colors really isn't worth it. Sure, there are a few cards out there that pay you off for having stuff that is all 5 colors, but you can just, play some good cards that meet those requirements, and not this one. At number 9, it's Sphinx of the Guild Pact, which has a similar problem to Transguild Courier. For 7 generic mana, it's a 5/5 flyer that is all colors, and it also has hexproof from monocolored. While it is a more imposing presence than Transguild Courier when it's on the battlefield, one of the few things the Courier does have going for it is that it lets you get a 5-color creature on the board relatively early, even before you have 5 lands in play. Sphinx of the Guild Pact doesn't come with that advantage since you have to crank out 7 mana, and an inefficient flyer that can't be destroyed by some removal isn't enough for that investment. At number 8, I've got Begin the Invasion. For X and 1 mana of each color, it's a sorcery that tutors up X battles and puts them directly on the battlefield. So, getting 1 mana of every color is a pretty big pain. Once you're there, you deserve something powerful, but Begin the Invasion definitely doesn't deliver because it demands you have even more mana around or it doesn't do anything. And if you're only paying 1 for X, you're not going to be getting a decent return on your massive investment. Once you're searching up more than 1 battle, it gets better, but you're going to end up with this clunky sorcery stuck in your hand forever, more often than it will pull off something powerful. And even once you're paying like 7 mana, including 1 of each color of course, you should be getting something awesome, and 2 battles still isn't really going to feel awesome. Unlike the other cards on this list, Begin the Invasion does have some potential to be better one day, but first we need to get some more battles, and probably some that allow for some insane combo when you search them up together. Right now though, Begin the Invasion asks for a lot and doesn't really deliver. At number 7, I've got Worldheart Phoenix. It's a 2/2 flyer for 3 generic and a red. That is a horrific starting point, but the text box is upside. If it's in your graveyard, you can pay 1 mana of each color to cast it, and it gets 2 +1/+1 counters when it enters the battlefield. It's nice to have a recursive creature, but unlocking this creature's recursion is pretty challenging, and even if you do, you're still paying 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer, so it doesn't exactly feel like you're doing something amazing. At number 6, it's Fleshformer, which has a similar design to Worldheart Phoenix, but it's even worse. For 2 generic and a black, it's a 2/2, and if you don't have access to 1 mana of any color, that's it. And obviously, you want something more than Scathe Zombies when you're paying 3 mana. Now, if you do have 1 mana of each color, the ability can be pretty cool. It gives itself +2/+2 and another creature -2/-2, which means he can operate as removal, and the threat of activation is a real nuisance in combat. But you're still playing a super weak creature up front, and even as nice as the activated ability can be, generating that kind of mana is no mean feat. And once you have it, you probably don't really have the time to be dumping it into this activated ability. It's also super obnoxious that they limited the ability to once per turn. If I can produce enough mana of any color to play this ability more than once a turn, or better, go infinite with it, I think I probably deserve it. At number 5, I've got Kida Stone. While the bottom 5 on this list have all been pretty bad, they do generally have the ability to do something, which isn't really true of the top 5 and certainly isn't true of Kida Stone. For 2 generic, it's an artifact, and when it enters, you draw a card. It's a good thing this does replace itself, because if it didn't, it would probably be one of the worst artifacts ever, because its only other ability is that you pay 5 generic mana and tap it to add 1 mana of each color to your mana pool. So what you have here is an artifact that can filter your mana once. It's a pretty big bummer, it doesn't even net you any mana. Would it really have been too good if you had to pay 4 to get 1 mana of each color? Probably not, and it wouldn't be such a bad card if it did. At number 4, it's Meeting of the Five. This sorcery costs 3 generic and 1 mana of each color, so it better do something awesome. Of course, the fact that it's on this list tells you it really doesn't get there. Once you can finally cast this clunky thing, you exile the top 10 cards of your library, and you can cast spells that cost exactly 3 colors from among them. Then it adds 2 mana of each color, and you can only use that mana to cast spells that are exactly 3 colors. So, Meeting of the Five can potentially let you cast a few cards from your top 10, but this card is so hard to cast and so restrictive with what it does that it just isn't something you should ever want to use. First, you have to build a deck that's pretty much all 3 color cards, and even once you do, you're not going to end up doing something insane when you cast this very often. After all, you're more or less limited to 10 mana worth of cards, so even if you do hit 3 color cards when you cast it, you're not going to cast all of them. Then there's the times when you hit like 1 or 2 cards, which still isn't going to feel like much of a return on your investment. They really should have made this so that you can put the 3 color cards that you can't cast into your hand at the end of your turn or something. That would have helped offset this card's very serious problems. But as serious as the problems are that Meeting of the Five has, I do think that there are 3 5 color cards that are even worse. For example, the number 3 card, which is Prism Array. For 4 generic and a blue, this is an enchantment with Converge. This means you get something for each color of mana you spend to cast it. In this case, you get a crystal counter for each color of mana you spend to cast this. You can remove a crystal counter to tap a creature, or you can pay 1 mana of each color to scry 3. Alright, so let's say you straight up have 1 mana of each color when you cast this, and you get all 5 crystal counters. That's the card's absolute ceiling, and guess what? It's not good at all. Removing counters to tap creatures is incredibly weak, doesn't even stun them or lock them down in any way, and you can quickly run out of those crystal counters. Sure, you're going to have access to a scry ability too, and that's not the worst mana sink ever, but it's still pretty costly. Basically, you've got to jump through some serious hoops for this to not be entirely useless, and once you do jump through those hoops, it's still mostly useless. There's no reason to play this card. At number 2, it's Naked Singularity. For 5 generic mana, this artifact mixes up all the mana. Plains produce red, islands produce green, swamps produce white, mountains produce blue, and forests produce black. That kind of effect can actually be pretty powerful at locking your opponents out of their mana in the right situation, and if things ended there, this might be an okay prison card, but unfortunately things don't end there. This card comes with 2 of the most dreaded words in Magic: Cumulative Upkeep. A card with Cumulative Upkeep requires you to put an age counter on it each upkeep, and then you pay the upkeep cost for each age counter on it. In other words, you have to sink 3 more mana into this on the next turn, then 6 mana on the turn after that, and so on. So, the best you're probably going to get out of this is messing up your opponent's mana for a turn, and while that might sound appealing, you had to play a 5 mana artifact to do that, and that very probably means you used up your whole turn to cast it anyway, so you're not really accomplishing anything. Things get even worse if your opponent is playing a multicolor deck and they don't really care how you flip their mana around. In that case, you're just going to end up time-walking yourself entirely, which is even worse. And at number 1, I've got Reality Twist, which is a blue version of Naked Singularity. Crazily enough, both of these cards are from Ice Age. I'm not really sure what they were thinking, printing 2 almost identical cards that have such a silly effect. Anyway, it's actually cheaper to play, it only costs 3 blue mana, but I think it's worse overall because its cumulative upkeep is even harder to pay. Instead of 3 generic, it costs 1 generic and 2 blue. The reason this is a problem is because Reality Twist messes up your mana too, so your chances of being able to produce the mana to pay the upkeep cost here is low, since you needed 3 blue to play it in the first place, and that makes it likely that you're not going to have the blue mana to even pay the upkeep cost once. At least with Singularity, if you really want to keep it around for a couple of turns, you can. With Reality Twist, that's far less likely. So, those are my picks for the 10 worst 5-color cards in Magic. If you're interested in the best 5-color cards, check out that top 10. If you want to own any of these awful cards, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to see other top 10s that look at the worst cards in the game, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to catch future top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.